Hi guys, Paul here, and this is going to be yet another video with a comparison between the TrueD versus the LaForge. Now this is going to be a little bit different to most of the videos out there because this is going to be a race comparison. And I also need to give you a little bit about the, I suppose I need to touch on the backstory behind how this all came about. This testing has probably taken about 3 months to do, and I'll get into that why. It's been quite a slow process because I've needed to do it at a race meet, at a specific race meet. Anyway, if you want to jump straight to the footage, I've got footage towards the end of this video and I'll have a link in the description, and there'll be two scenarios. One is the TrueD versus the standard NexWave, and also the LaForge versus the standard NexWave. So if you want to jump straight to that footage, by all means you can go ahead and do that. So what I did earlier this year is when the TrueD V3 came out, I basically went ahead and purchased it. Now what I liked about the TrueD was the fact that it was one module, and unlike the LaForge, you didn't have to have the cable that goes across from one side to the other, and the pricing on the TrueD was really good too. And I had lots of good feedback anyway, videos like Joshua Bardwell had done on it, so it looked as though it was going to be a no-brainer. That looked like the module that I wanted to go with. Just simple, plug in and off you go. Now, we did testing with the TrueD. With one antenna, it didn't seem to work very well at all. Now, I believe there's a software issue with the way that works. You have to run two antennas. Once you ran two antennas, it worked fine. Tried out an acro first, got out behind trees. It was basically, it worked well. There was no issues at all as far as that goes. It seemed to be doing the better than the NexWave. And then what we did was we went to a race meet, and this was 4 quads racing on the immersion band. So you've got around about 40 megahertz separation because we're running channels 1, 3, 5 and 7, and it seemed to work well. It wasn't too bad at all. Now the following race we had, this was back in February I think it might have been, or something along those lines. We were running 7 pilots, and in Australia we're limited to using the immersion band. So that meant, unlike race band where you've got 37 megahertz separation between the channels, we only had 20 megahertz separation. So keep in mind, this is the first time I'm actually racing with 7 pilots. I've got the TrueD in my goggles, and Thomas is running with his NexWave module. This is the standard NexWave. So I actually purchased 2 of these TrueD modules, one for myself and one for Thomas, and Thomas chose not to race with it because he didn't want to risk it. He wanted to make sure mine was going to be okay, and if it was okay, he was going to install it in his goggles and run with them also. So essentially we've gone out there, we've raced with 7 people, and 7 people being pretty close. As expected, the video wasn't as great as I would have liked, but it was flyable. There was no two ways about it. I mean, it was doable. I mean, we've offline indoors where the video's been worse than that. Now, I didn't realize it until we actually got home, and I was discussing what the video was like with Thomas, and Thomas said, my video was perfect. I had no issues at all. It was no different to flying with 4 people. And I'm like, what? It couldn't have been that good. He goes, yes, mine was perfect. You know what I mean? A few little tiny glitches here and there, but they were really minor. Just didn't affect anything at all. So then what I did was I started reviewing the video that he had and the video that I had. And sure enough, his video was actually much better than mine. So that was the first indicator that something wasn't quite right. So at this point is when we started sort of investigating, looking at and analyzing all the videos, etc., and seeing exactly where the differences were. And it appeared as though the TrueD was constantly changing from one receiver to another. So if another quad went past that was close and its signal strength was stronger, it would be just jumping from one receiver to another. Even though it was jumping still to my channel, it was jumping from one receiver to another. And unfortunately that was causing issues in my video feed. So what I'm going to do now is actually run the video and show you exactly what it is that I'm actually talking about, and this will give you a pretty good idea. So what you're looking at there is Thomas's feed on the left and my feed on the right. Now they're complete different races, but the good thing was we're both on channel 3, so we're essentially running against the same people. Now what you'll notice is a lot of flickers in the right hand screen. This is the TrueD, and I was running 2 antennas there, a patch and a Skew Planar. The standard Skew Planars that Thomas and myself run, which are the ones that I've made up, and it was just constantly changing. And you'll see me a few times actually sort of hold back on going through gates even though I'm lined up, and that's because with the DVR isn't a true representation of what was actually going on in the goggles. With the FatShark, these are the V3 Dominators, sometimes you get this rolling shutter type thing. It's like the image actually rolls, and it's quite distracting. The FatShark reckon this issue doesn't exist, but a heap of people sort of pointed that out. But anyway, to cut a long story short, the video just wasn't the best, but you can still see what it's actually doing. It's not as stable an image as what Thomas is getting with his standard NexWave. And that was kind of frustrating because, like I said, we paid money for these, and I essentially purchased them with the intention of having diversity for racing, and it just wasn't working well. So this is where the problem initially started, and what we did was, at the next race meet, I ended up trying it again on a spare set of goggles, but this time I ran with a second diversity system just to see if Thomas's module, maybe it was a faulty module that I had, maybe that was the cause, and that was why it wasn't actually working well. So hence I swapped over, went to Thomas's module, put that in my goggles and tried that out, and sure enough, it was pretty much the same thing. So for the following race, I went with my NexWave module, and that worked well. I had no issues at all. It was a much better experience, so I was quite pleased with that. But at this point, I've got these two modules that I've purchased, and what do I do with them? Because I essentially bought them for racing. I mean, like I said, they worked well for acro, etc. But in this race scenario with the 20 megahertz separation, it was just changing from one receiver to another way too much. So anyway, at around about that time, I had LaForge contact me and ask me if I wanted to have a look at their module. And I said, look, I was happy to look at it, but I wasn't confident it was actually going to work well. And I explained the issue I had with the TrueD, and they were quite confident that their module wasn't going to cause the same issues. So keep in mind, at this stage, I've wasted a lot of time. I've got these two modules that I've paid for, and now someone else wants to send me a set of modules to try out. And I'm really reluctant because I wasn't happy with the way mine actually turned out. So anyway, to cut a long story short, what I did was install the module into a spare set of goggles. And then what I did was, at the next race meet, I was spotting for Thomas. So I stood right next to him, basically ran the LaForge, and I was recording his video feed while he was flying and I was spotting for him. And I didn't review the video until I got home because I wasn't game enough to actually risk racing with the diversity module after the bad experience we had, or bad experience I had earlier in the year. So this time around, what you're looking at is the NexWave versus the LaForge. It's the same race, tuned into the same channel, and I'm basically standing right next to Thomas, and I'm recording this with my goggles running the LaForge. So everything's the same, and interestingly, the LaForge did significantly better, in my opinion, than what the NexWave did. And for the next few races, I ended up actually watching other people's feeds through the LaForge, and it seemed to handle this 20 megahertz separation just with ease. So essentially, I'm not trying to tell you what to buy, what not to buy. I'm just sharing our experience. And some people may have had a better experience with the TrueD. I probably would have been happy with the TrueD if I didn't have Thomas's video to compare with. And I realized what I was seeing wasn't related to having so many quads in the air, but rather the diversity system not handling that scenario very well. The LaForge definitely did do a lot better than the TrueD. Now, not everyone's going to be flying in this sort of a scenario, so I would recommend looking at other people's videos. Now, Joshua Bardwell's done a heap of videos on different various ways of testing the LaForge versus the NexWave. So I would highly recommend going over to his channel and having a look at his videos and just sort of compare to what you do and see which set actually suits you the best. But look, this finding was an interesting one. I wasn't planning on doing a video on this, but we definitely learned something in this specific scenario, and I just thought it was worth sharing our experience. Now, hopefully TrueD actually do updates to their firmware and resolve this issue. But at the moment, I think we'll be sticking with the LaForge because it seemed to be a lot more solid, especially when switching. And the other key thing I didn't actually mention was with LaForge, you can have the audio one where it actually makes a little beep sound as it changes from one receiver to another. The interesting thing was the LaForge wasn't just jumping from one to another constantly. It would change every now and then, but it would hardly do it. Basically, when the quad was at its furthest point, it would target the directional antenna, but as soon as you got close, it tended to be, well, I'm assuming it was switching back. So it spent more time on the one antenna rather than the second antenna. Which one it was switching to, I don't know. But look, the video was really solid. So anyway, I'm going to leave the video at that. Please share your thoughts and opinions down below. We're all learning just like everyone else, and the more information we have, the better it is for everyone. Thanks for taking time to watch this video. I'll catch you guys in the next one.